Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack something literally massive, the hidden architecture of global power. We're going to peel back the layers on the quiet, underlying mechanisms that are driving global conflicts and dictating corporate dominance in our modern world. If you've ever found yourself wondering who's actually pulling the strings behind the international headlines, well, you are definitely in the right place. Okay, let's dive right into this. Look at this number, 20. According to recent data from CrowdArt, as of March 2026, there are 20 active armed conflicts happening simultaneously across 4 different continents. 20. It's a pretty staggering reality, and it really forces us to look closer at the structural forces connecting these seemingly isolated events. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with 20 wars, one machine, move into information as power infrastructure, then look at objects, arenas, and actors. After that, we'll map out the geopolitical spectrum and wrap up with why state supremacy endures. All right, part 1, 20 wars, one machine, taking a look at the global conflict map of 2026. To actually wrap our heads around this, CrowdArt breaks these 20 conflicts down into 3 distinct tiers. It grounds us in the actual physical reality of it all. First, you have the headline wars, places like Iran, Ukraine, and Gaza, which totally capture the world's attention. Then, you've got the forgotten wars in places like Sudan, Congo, Myanmar, and Yemen. And finally, the invisible conflicts, which includes the violence in the Sahel, Mexico, Somalia, and the suppression in Uyghur and Tibetan regions. Now, you might be wondering, why are some of these front-page news every single day, while others are basically invisible? Well, it boils down to what we call media monoculture. Take February 2026, for example. Right after the coordinated strikes on Iran, Western media completely pivoted. Iran dominated the news cycle entirely. It exposes this massive structural failure. Our current information architecture is seemingly only capable of holding one major global crisis in view at a time. Which brings us to part 2, information as power infrastructure, how this media monoculture actually works. So, the crucial point here is understanding this definition of information architecture. Think of it as the invisible wiring that ties the tools of digital power to the coverage of global issues. It literally dictates what gets broadcast to the masses and what gets kept in the dark. This infrastructure itself acts as a profoundly powerful mechanism of geopolitical control. Because of that wiring, we kind of have to zoom out and start viewing these physical wars as symptoms. Across all 20 fronts, these conflicts actually share common root causes, common beneficiaries, and the exact same patterns of impunity. And the conceptual bridge connecting all these physical battlegrounds to the rest of the world, that's the information infrastructure, which is entirely owned and operated by major tech platforms. Let's move on to part 3, objects, arenas, and actors, the roles of the big tech giants. Based on some absolutely incredible research out of Columbia SIPA, I want you to ask yourself a direct question. Do tech companies actually matter as geopolitical actors? Like, do they actually have their own independent agency on the world stage? Now, what's really interesting about this matrix is how it filters tech case studies by geopolitical relevance. You can see exactly how specific digital tools, like digital infrastructure or big data, literally smash into major real-world issues like wars, public movements, and elections. This matrix is exactly how we determine a company's level of agency. The research breaks this down brilliantly into categories. First up, tech as objects. These are companies being used as bargaining chips by states. Think of the threatened bans on TikTok, or how Taiwan's TSMC is heavily courted just for its microchips. Second, you have tech as arenas. This is where platforms are used as infrastructural battlegrounds by external actors. Facebook being used to organize during the 2011 Arab Spring, or X being utilized by foreign entities in the 2016 US elections. But here's the wild part. The third category is tech as actors. This is where a company steps up and exerts independent agency. A perfect example of this is SpaceX's Starlink. They actively stepped in to provide internet infrastructure in Ukraine and independently circumvented state-run internet shutdowns in Iran. In these cases, a private commercial product asserted its own agency, sometimes operating completely outside the immediate foreign policy goals of its home country. To put that into historical perspective, researchers actually compared these modern tech giants to the British East India Company. Crazy, right? But here's the catch. While Starlink shows remarkable autonomy today, it still operates inside modern regulatory limits. The East India Company, on the other hand, had quasi-sovereignty. They had private armies and direct territorial rule. So it shows us that while corporate power today is undeniably massive, it takes a fundamentally different digital form. All right, part 4, the geopolitical spectrum, how we actually score this tech influence. So, what actually lets a company act on the world stage? It boils down to specific enabling conditions. What's their firm profile? Are they privately owned or linked to national security? What about their domestic government? How heavily regulated are they? And foreign governments, what investments or legal disputes do they have abroad? Long story short, private ownership and a lack of direct national security links give a company way more leeway to act. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly where different companies land. It maps out a 1 to 8 spectrum of geopolitical action potential, placing these massive corporations firmly on the board, based directly on those enabling conditions we just talked about. When we actually reveal the scores, it makes total sense. Companies innovating at warp speed in less regulated spaces, like SpaceX and X, score much higher on the agency scale, hitting a 5. On the flip side, legacy firms or those heavily tied to state national security, like China's ZTE or Taiwan's TSMC, score a much lower 2. They have massive influence for sure, but far less independent agency. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, State Supremacy Endures, How the Leash Tightens. Let's move to and see how this builds over time. Despite all the immense power these companies wield, their geopolitical agency trajectory follows a very distinct pattern. Notice how the arc of corporate agency rockets up as their technologies scale, but eventually, it hits an inflection point and begins to taper off. Researchers see this happening in 3 phases. Phase 1 is leeway, lots of rapid growth and deep autonomy. Phase 2 is the inflection point, where their massive influence suddenly attracts intense government oversight. And Phase 3 is regulatory containment. Now, the US market gives companies a much longer leash initially compared to China's rapid state integration. But guess what? They both ultimately end up in containment by the state. You want a perfect micro-narrative of this in the real world? Look at the recent clash between Brazil and X. The platform tried to plant its flag on a political stance, citing free speech to resist court orders. Brazil's response? They used their coercive authority to enforce a nationwide block, and ultimately, faced with massive economic and reputational costs, the platform yielded. It absolutely proves that when pushed, sovereign states still hold the ultimate override switch. So moving forward, what should we be looking out for? The report highlights 3 key watch points for this escalating state control. First, keep an eye on domestic antitrust lawsuits trying to chop these tech giants down to size. Second, watch for the adoption of open standards like the Matrix Protocol, that is, states actively trying to reclaim their digital sovereignty. And third, the escalating US-China trade war, where export controls are used as weapons, literally turning these companies into pawns. So, we're left with this really powerful realization. A purely technopolar world, where companies completely eclipse governments, is actually highly unlikely. Tech companies matter deeply, no doubt about it, but their power is ultimately bounded by sovereign law. So the question I want to leave you with today is this. As the battle lines are drawn and states aggressively fight to reclaim their digital utilities, who is actually going to win this new tech Cold War? Thanks for joining me on The Explainer today, and keep questioning the architecture around you.